The morning sun painted the Wyoming prairie in golden colors as Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her small Honda Civic. She stretched her tired muscles after sleeping in the cramped car all night. Her back ached and her neck felt stiff, but her eyes sparkled with excitement. Today was the day she had dreamed about for 16 long years. Sarah opened her car trunk and carefully lifted out a rifle case that looked nothing like the serious black cases around her. Her case was bright pink, with colorful flower stickers that she had applied herself during quiet evenings at the library where she worked. The other competitors loading their expensive equipment nearby stopped what they were doing to stare at her unusual case. She wore a simple yellow sundress, with small blue flowers printed on it and white tennis shoes that had seen better days. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail with a cheerful blue ribbon. She looked more like someone heading to a picnic than a shooting competition. The contrast between her appearance and the serious military style, clothing worn by other competitors, was striking. Sarah walked toward the registration table carrying her pink case. She heard whispers and quiet laughter from the men around her. Most of them wore full camouflage uniforms with heavy boots and tactical vests. Their equipment cases were covered in military patches and stickers from various shooting competitions. They looked like they belonged in a war zone rather than a sporting event. The registration official looked confused when Sarah approached his table. He glanced at her flowery dress, then at the serious competitors behind her, then back at her again. He clearly was not sure if she was in the right place. Sarah smiled politely and handed him her registration papers along with her entry fee that she had saved for 2 years, working at the small-town library in Montana. When she opened her rifle case in front of the equipment inspector, the entire area fell silent. Inside was a custom-built precision rifle, painted in bright pink with purple accents and decorated with hand-painted flowers along the stock. The scope was also pink, and even the bipod legs had been painted to match. It looked like something a child might design rather than a serious competition weapon. The equipment inspector examined the rifle carefully, checking every specification against the competition rules. Despite its unusual appearance, the rifle met all technical requirements. The barrel was the correct length, the trigger pull weight was within limits, and all safety features were properly installed. He stamped Sarah approval papers but shook his head in amazement at the colorful weapon. Sarah found an empty space on the firing line between 2 serious-looking men who immediately moved their equipment further away from her as if her bright rifle might contaminate their professional setups. One was a former military sniper with arms covered in military tattoos, and the other was a professional hunting guide who had competed in dozens of similar events. She began setting up her shooting mat, which was also pink and decorated with small embroidered butterflies that her grandmother had sewn on years ago. Her equipment bag was a cheerful floral pattern that matched her dress. Every item she pulled out looked like it belonged in a craft store rather than a shooting competition. The sniper beside her could not contain his amusement any longer. He turned to his friend and spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. He said that someone must have gotten lost on their way to a quilting bee and accidentally wandered into a shooting match. His friend laughed and added that maybe she was planning to knit doilies between shooting rounds. Sarah heard every word but continued setting up her equipment with calm determination. She had experienced this kind of reaction before at smaller local competitions. Men always assumed that because she was a woman who liked bright colors, she could not possibly be a serious shooter. She had learned long ago that the best response was to let her shooting do the talking. She carefully assembled her rifle and checked every component twice. Her movements were practiced and efficient, showing years of experience handling the weapon. She adjusted her scope settings and confirmed her zero using a laser bore sighter that was also painted pink to match her rifle theme. Despite the unusual colors, her technique was flawlessly professional. More competitors gathered around to stare at the unusual sight of a woman in a sundress preparing a pink rifle for serious competition. Some took photos with their phones, while others made jokes about bringing their wives or daughters to future matches. The hunting guide loudly wondered if she had confused this event with a toy gun competition at a county fair. Sarah opened her data book, which contained hundreds of pages of handwritten notes about wind conditions, bullet trajectories, and atmospheric effects on long-range shooting. Every page was filled with careful calculations and observations from years of practice. The notebook itself was covered in bright fabric with a pattern of shooting stars that seemed appropriate for someone reaching for seemingly impossible goals. She began studying the weather conditions for the day, checking wind flags and measuring atmospheric pressure with a small handheld device. Her preparation was methodical and thorough, showing a deep understanding of the science behind precision shooting. She made notes in her colorful data book, using a pink pen that matched her rifle. The competition director announced that shooting would begin in 30 minutes. Sarah used this time to perform dry fire practice, carefully aiming at distant objects and practicing her breathing techniques. Her form was textbook perfect, with proper bone support and consistent cheek weld on the rifle stock. A small crowd of spectators had gathered behind the firing line, and many pointed at Sarah's unusual setup. Parents with children seemed delighted by the colorful rifle, while serious shooting enthusiasts shook their heads in disapproval. Local news reporters arrived and immediately focused their cameras on the bright pink rifle that stood out dramatically against the traditional equipment around it. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to block out all the attention and comments. She closed her eyes for a moment and remembered her grandfather's words from years ago. He had told her that shooting was 90% mental and only 10% physical. He taught her that the most important weapon was confidence in yourself and your preparation. When she opened her eyes, she felt ready for the challenge ahead. The laughter and jokes from other competitors no longer bothered her. She had traveled too far and worked too hard to let anyone else's opinion affect her performance. In just a few minutes, she would have the chance to prove that skill mattered more than appearance, and that underestimating an opponent based on how they looked was a serious mistake. The competition was about to begin, and Sarah Mitchell was ready to shock everyone who had laughed at her bright pink rifle. The competition director raised his megaphone and called all shooters to the firing line for the first round. Sarah picked up her bright pink rifle and walked to shooting position number 12 between the military sniper and the hunting guide. Both men glanced at her colorful equipment and shared knowing looks as if they already knew how this would end. The first challenge was a standard 1,000-meter shot that most experienced competitors considered routine practice. Large paper targets with black bullseye circles were positioned far down the prairie, where they appeared as tiny dots even through powerful scopes. Sarah settled into her shooting position and adjusted her pink bipod legs until her rifle was perfectly stable. She pressed her cheek against the rifle stock and looked through her scope at the distant target. The crosshairs were crystal clear, and she could see the black bullseye center perfectly despite the long distance. Sarah had practiced this exact shot thousands of times at her local range back home in Montana. Her breathing became slow and controlled as she entered the focused mental state that her grandfather had taught her years ago. The wind flags along the range showed a gentle breeze coming from the left at about 5 miles per hour. Sarah made a small adjustment to her scope to compensate for the wind drift that would push her bullet slightly off course during its 1-second flight to the target. She had memorized the wind drift calculations for her specific ammunition and rifle combination through countless hours of practice and study. The shooting began with competitor number 1, who fired 5 shots in rapid succession. The electronic scoring system immediately displayed his results on a large screen visible to all spectators. He scored 87 points out of a possible 100, which was respectable but not exceptional. Light applause came from the small crowd of spectators behind the firing line. Each shooter fired in order, as Sarah watched and listened to their techniques. Some took their time with careful aim, while others fired quickly and confidently. The scores ranged from 75 to 94 points, with most competitors falling somewhere in the middle range. Sarah noticed that several shooters seemed to be struggling with the wind, conditions that kept shifting slightly throughout the morning. When competitor number 11 finished his string of 5 shots, it was finally Sarah's turn. The sniper beside her made a quiet comment to his friend about hoping the little lady did not hurt herself with the big, scary rifle. Several other competitors turned to watch what they expected would be an embarrassing display of poor shooting from the woman with the toy-looking rifle. Sarah ignored all the attention and focused completely on her target. She controlled her breathing and waited for the wind to settle into a steady pattern. Her first shot broke cleanly, and she felt the rifle recoil smoothly against her shoulder. Through her scope, she watched the bullet impact and saw a perfect hit in the center of the bullseye. The electronic display showed a 10-point score for a perfect center shot. A few spectators clapped politely, but most seemed surprised by the accurate shot. The competitors nearby stopped their conversations to look at Sarah with new interest. She quickly reloaded and prepared for her second shot, without showing any emotion about her perfect start. Her grandfather had taught her to treat each shot as completely separate from the ones before it. Her second shot was another perfect bullseye, followed immediately by a third and fourth shot that also hit the center ring. The crowd behind the firing line began to murmur with growing excitement as they realized something special was happening. Sarah calmly loaded her fifth and final shot for this round while maintaining her steady breathing and perfect shooting position. The fifth shot completed her perfect string with another bullseye hit that brought her total score to 100 points. The electronic display flashed her perfect score as the spectators burst into genuine applause. Sarah had achieved what only two other competitors managed in the first round, and she had done it with a rifle that looked like a child toy. The military sniper beside her stared at the scoring display in disbelief. He had scored 89 points with his expensive military-grade rifle and years of professional training. The hunting guide on her other side had managed 91 points, and he considered himself one of the best shooters in the region. Neither man was smiling anymore as they looked at Sarah's bright pink rifle with new respect. During the lunch break, several competitors approached Sarah to introduce themselves and ask about her background. The laughter and jokes from the morning had completely stopped and were replaced by genuine curiosity about her shooting techniques. A former Olympic shooter asked about her training methods, while a professional instructor wanted to know about her rifle specifications. Sarah remained humble and friendly as she answered their questions. She explained that her grandfather had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old, and that she had been practicing almost every day for the past 16 years. She worked at a small library which gave her access to countless books about ballistics mathematics and shooting theory that she studied during slow afternoons at work. The afternoon brought the second round with targets placed at 1,500 meters, which was significantly more challenging than the morning session. The longer distance meant that wind conditions, atmospheric pressure, and even the rotation of the Earth would affect bullet flight. Sarah spent extra time studying the wind flags and making calculations in her colorful data book. Once again, she shot in position 12 after watching the other competitors struggle with the increased difficulty. Several experienced shooters managed only 60 or 70 points out of 100, as the longer distance exposed small errors in their techniques. The wind had picked up slightly and was now gusting unpredictably, which made consistent accuracy much more challenging. Sarah adjusted her scope, settings for the longer distance, and took extra time to read the wind conditions before each shot. Her first shot at 1,500 meters was another perfect bullseye that drew amazed comments from spectators who were watching through their own spotting scopes. She followed with 4 more center hits to complete another perfect 100-point score. The competition officials began checking their equipment to make sure the electronic scoring system was working correctly. Perfect scores at 1,500 meters were extremely rare even among world-class shooters. Sarah had now achieved 2 consecutive perfect rounds with a homemade pink rifle while wearing a sundress and tennis shoes. The second day ended, Sarah found herself in third place overall behind only 2 former military snipers who had decades of professional experience. The same men who had mocked her bright rifle that morning now watched her every move, trying to understand her shooting techniques. Tomorrow would bring even longer shots and greater challenges, but Sarah had already proven that appearances could be very deceiving in the world of precision shooting. The third morning of competition arrived with dark clouds gathering on the horizon and a cool breeze that made the prairie grass dance in waves. Sarah woke up in her Honda Civic feeling more rested than the previous nights as excitement had replaced her nervousness. She had climbed to second place overall after another perfect shooting round the evening before, and now the other competitors looked at her with genuine respect rather than amusement. As she walked toward the registration tent carrying her pink rifle case, she noticed television crews setting up cameras and reporters interviewing some of the top competitors. Word had spread quickly through the shooting community about the librarian with the colorful rifle who was defeating seasoned professionals.
Social media posts about her,
unusual equipment, and perfect scores had gone viral overnight, bringing unexpected attention to the competition. The competition director called all remaining shooters to gather around the main tent for a special announcement. Only 12 competitors remained after 3 days of challenging long-range shooting, and Sarah was proud to be among them. The director explained that the sponsors had decided to add an unprecedented final challenge that had never been attempted in any official Shooting competition before a target would be placed at 4,000 meters, which was nearly 2.5 miles away from the firing line. The distance was so extreme that the target would barely be visible even through the most powerful spotting scopes available. Only the top 5 competitors would be allowed to attempt this historic shot, and Sarah had earned her place among this elite group through her consistently perfect performance. The announcement sent excited murmurs through the crowd of spectators, who had grown substantially over the past 3 days. Many shooting experts considered a 4,000-meter shot to be impossible under competition conditions. The bullet would travel through the air for more than 6 seconds, giving wind conditions, gravity, and atmospheric pressure time to dramatically affect its flight path. Sarah spent the rest of the morning studying advanced ballistics, tables, and weather data with an intensity that impressed even the most experienced competitors. She filled several pages of her colorful data book with complex calculations involving bullet drop wind drift and the Coriolis effect caused by the Earth rotation. Most shooters relied on computer programs and electronic devices for such calculations, but Sarah preferred to work through the mathematics by hand to ensure she understood every variable. The other 4 competitors selected for the ultimate challenge included 2 former military snipers who had served in combat zones around the world. The third was Marcus Thompson, an Olympic gold medalist who held several world records in precision shooting. The 4th competitor was Jake Morrison, a professional hunting guide who had been featured in numerous shooting magazines and television shows. Each of these men carried rifles that cost more than Sarah's entire annual salary at the library. Their equipment included the latest electronic rangefinders, laser wind meters, and computerized ballistic calculators. They had access to custom-loaded ammunition that had been precisely manufactured for their specific rifles. Their scopes cost more than most people spent on their cars. In contrast, Sarah's rifle had been built by a local gunsmith in Montana using parts she had saved money to buy over several years. Her scope was a mid-range model that she had purchased used from an online auction site. Her ammunition was factory-loaded bullets that she bought in bulk to save money. Yet her bright pink rifle had consistently outperformed much more expensive equipment throughout the competition. As the afternoon approached and wine conditions began to stabilize, officials started preparing for the historic 4,000-meter attempt. Survey crews used GPS equipment to precisely measure the distance and set up the target at exactly 4,000 meters from the firing line. The target itself was larger than normal to account for the extreme distance, but it still appeared impossibly small when viewed through spotting scopes, television. Cameras were positioned at various angles to capture the attempt from multiple viewpoints. Slow-motion cameras were set up to try to track the bullet flight if possible. Electronic sensors around the target would precisely measure any impacts and determine their exact location. This would be one of the most documented shooting attempts in history. Sarah continued her preparation by studying wind patterns at different altitudes between the firing line and the distant target. She observed how leaves and grass moved at various distances and made notes about wind direction changes that occurred throughout the day. Her scientific approach to shooting preparation impressed the Olympic champion, who commented that most shooters did not put nearly as much effort into understanding environmental conditions. The hunting guide Jake Morrison approached Sarah during a break in preparation and admitted that he had seriously underestimated her abilities. He apologized for his earlier comments and said that watching her methodical approach had taught him new techniques that he planned to incorporate into his own shooting. The military snipers also showed newfound respect by asking her opinion about wind reading techniques. As evening approached, the competition officials announced that the 4,000-meter challenge would begin at sunset, when wind conditions were typically most stable. Each competitor would be allowed only one shot at the distant target. There would be no practice rounds or sight-in shots. Success or failure would depend entirely on preparation, calculation, and execution under pressure. Sarah cleaned her bright pink rifle one final time and carefully checked every component. She verified her scope mounting screws were tight and confirmed her zero using a laser bore sight. Her ammunition was carefully selected from her best-performing batch, and she even weighed each bullet to ensure consistency. Despite using less expensive equipment, her attention to detail matched or exceeded that of her competitors. The sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the prairie in golden colors that reminded Sarah of the sunset she watched from her grandfather's farm years ago. Soon she would have the opportunity to attempt something that many experts considered impossible. The woman who had been laughed at for her bright rifle was now preparing to make history in the most challenging shot ever attempted in organized competition. The moment of truth was approaching, and Sarah Mitchell felt more ready than she had ever been in her life. The Wyoming prairie fell silent as the sun hung low on the western horizon, painting everything in golden orange light. Television cameras focused on the 5 competitors preparing for the most challenging shot in competitive shooting history. Sarah sat quietly on her pink shooting mat, checking her rifle one final time while the other 4 shooters made last-minute adjustments to their expensive equipment. Competition officials used powerful spotting scopes to confirm that the target was properly positioned at exactly 4,000 meters from the firing line. The target appeared as barely more than a tiny speck even through the strongest optics available. Most spectators could not see it at all without electronic assistance. The distance was so extreme that sound from a successful impact would take nearly 12 seconds to travel back to the firing line. Jake Morrison, the professional hunting guide, was selected to shoot first. He carried a custom rifle that had been built by one of the most famous gunsmiths in America and cost more than $40,000. His scope was a military-grade optic with electronic range-finding capabilities and automatic wind compensation. He wore a full ghillie suit that made him nearly invisible against the prairie grass. Morrison spent 15 minutes setting up his shot, studying wind indicators through binoculars and making calculations on an expensive tablet computer. He adjusted his rifle position multiple times and checked his scope settings repeatedly. The pressure of attempting something that had never been accomplished before was clearly affecting his normally steady nerves. When Morrison finally fired his shot, the crowd watched through spotting scopes, trying to follow the bullet flight toward the distant target. Electronic sensors around the target would detect any impact and immediately display the results on large screens visible to spectators. After what seemed like an eternity, the display showed that his shot had missed the target by approximately 6 feet to the left. Light applause acknowledged Morrison's effort, even though he had missed the target completely. Hitting within 10 feet of a target at 4,000 meters was actually an impressive achievement that demonstrated exceptional shooting skill. The hunting guide shook his head in frustration as he realized how many variables had affected his bullet during its long flight through changing air conditions. Marcus Thompson, the Olympic gold medalist, prepared for his attempt with methodical precision that had won him medals at the highest levels of international competition. His rifle was a work of art with a custom stock made from exotic wood and metalwork that looked more like jewelry than a shooting instrument. Every component had been individually selected and fitted by master craftsmen. Thompson took his time studying atmospheric conditions through electronic instruments that measured temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure to incredible precision. He made subtle adjustments to his scope based on ballistic computer calculations that factored in dozens of environmental variables. His preparation was flawless and professional in every detail. The Olympic champion firing technique was textbook perfect, with controlled breathing and steady rifle hold that showed years of world-class training. His shot broke cleanly and the bullet began its journey toward the distant target, carrying the hopes of everyone who believed the 4,000-meter shot was possible. The electronic display showed that Thompson's shot had landed approximately 4 feet below the target center. While still technically a miss, his bullet had come closer than anyone had ever achieved at such extreme distance in organized competition. The crowd erupted in appreciative applause, recognizing the incredible skill required to come so close to an impossible target. The first military sniper, David Rodriguez, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, where he had made numerous long-range shots under combat conditions. His rifle was a military-issue weapon that had been extensively modified with competition-grade components. Rodriguez was known for staying calm under pressure and had never been seen to show nervousness before any shot. Rodriguez's preparation was efficient and professional, without wasted motion or unnecessary delays. He relied more on experience and instinct than electronic gadgets, making quick visual assessments of wind conditions and atmospheric factors. His approach reflected military training where decisions must be made quickly, without time for extensive calculations. His shot was fired with confidence after only 8 minutes of preparation. The bullet flight seemed perfect as it arced toward the distant target, following a trajectory that looked promising through the spotting scopes. Electronic sensors detected an impact that landed 3.5 feet to the right of the target center, representing another extremely close miss. The second military sniper, Robert Chen, had earned his reputation during special operations missions where precision shooting often meant the difference between mission success and failure. His rifle was equipped with the same scope used by military snipers in combat zones around the world. Chen was known for making difficult shots that other shooters considered impossible. Chen spent 12 minutes preparing for his attempt, studying the target area through multiple spotting scopes and making careful notes in a tactical data book. He paid special attention to mirage patterns that revealed air density changes between the firing line and target. His military training showed in every aspect of his systematic preparation routine. When Chen fired his shot, the trajectory looked excellent through the powerful optics trained on the target area. The bullet appeared to be heading directly toward the center of the distant target as it followed its long, arcing flight path through the evening air. Spectators held their breath waiting for the electronic sensors to register an impact. The display screen flashed showing that Chen's shot had missed by only 18 inches below the target center. The crowd gasped in amazement at how close he had come to achieving the impossible shot. 18 inches at 4,000 meters represented incredibly precise shooting that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with any rifle and ammunition combination. Now, only Sarah remained to attempt the historic 4,000-meter shot. The same woman who had been laughed at 3 days earlier for her bright pink rifle was the final hope for achieving something that shooting experts had declared impossible. She picked up her colorful weapon and walked toward the firing line as hundreds of spectators watched in anticipation of either triumph or heartbreak. Sarah walked slowly toward the firing line carrying her bright pink rifle as the entire prairie seemed to hold its breath. Television cameras followed her every step, while hundreds of spectators watched through binoculars and spotting scopes. The same woman who had been dismissed as a lost quilter 3 days earlier was now the final hope for achieving what many considered impossible in competitive shooting. She settled onto her colorful shooting mat and began her preparation ritual that had become familiar to everyone watching. Her movements were calm and deliberate, showing no signs of the enormous pressure she faced. 4 accomplished shooters with superior equipment had failed to hit the distant target, and now everything depended on her homemade pink rifle and years of patient practice in rural Montana. Sarah opened her flower-covered data book and reviewed the calculations she had been refining throughout the day. She had studied the failed attempts of the previous shooters and noticed subtle patterns in how their bullets had been affected by changing wind conditions. Her scientific mind processed every detail looking for clues that might give her an advantage, despite her simpler equipment. The wind had shifted slightly during the previous attempts, creating a gentle crosswind from the southwest at approximately 7 miles per hour. Sarah made careful notes about the direction and estimated strength of air movement at different distances toward the target. She observed grass movements and dust patterns to understand how wind speed changed between the firing line and the distant target area. Temperature was dropping as the sun sank lower, creating atmospheric conditions that would affect bullet flight in subtle but important ways. Cooler air was denser, which would slow her bullet slightly and cause it to drop more than her calculations predicted. Sarah made mental adjustments to her aim point to compensate for the changing conditions that her competitors had not fully considered. She checked her rifle one final time, ensuring that every component was properly secured and aligned. The bright, pink weapon looked almost cheerful against the serious brown prairie grass, but Sarah knew that its colorful appearance hid the precision engineering within. Her grandfather had taught her that the most important part of any rifle was the shooter behind it, not the fancy equipment attached to it. The target at 4,000 meters was barely visible as a tiny speck through her scope, even at maximum magnification. Sarah had to use her peripheral vision and careful scope adjustments to locate the small black square that represented her goal. The distance was so extreme that the target covered less area than a grain of rice would appear at normal reading distance. Sarah controlled her breathing and entered the focused mental state that had carried her through thousands of practice sessions. She thought about her grandfather who had passed away 2 years earlier, and how proud he would be to see her attempting this historic shot. She remembered his words about confidence and preparation being more important than expensive equipment or other people's opinions. The crowd behind the firing line fell completely silent as Sarah positioned her rifle and began her final aiming sequence. Even the television reporters stopped talking as everyone realized they were witnessing a potentially historic moment. The woman with the bright pink rifle was about to attempt something that would either make history or join the list of spectacular failures. Sarah made her final scope adjustment and settled into her shooting position with the rifle rock steady on its bipod. Her breathing became slow and controlled as she waited for the perfect moment when wind conditions stabilized. She had learned to feel atmospheric changes through tiny sensations on her skin and subtle shifts in air pressure. The moment arrived when Sarah felt complete harmony between herself, her rifle, and the environmental conditions around her. Her finger applied steady pressure to the trigger as she focused entirely on the tiny distant target. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the prairie as her bullet began its long journey through the evening air. For 6 endless seconds, the bullet traveled toward the distant target, fighting against gravity, wind, and atmospheric resistance. Spectators strained to follow its flight path through powerful optics, while electronic sensors waited to detect any impact. Sarah remained motionless in her firing position, watching through her scope with steady concentration. Suddenly, the spotters behind telescopes began shouting in amazement. The electronic display screen flashed, showing a perfect bullseye hit dead center in the target. The crowd erupted in thunderous cheers and applause as officials confirmed the impossible achievement through multiple independent measurements. Sarah had accomplished something that shooting experts had declared impossible. The same men who had laughed at her bright pink rifle 3 days earlier now rushed to congratulate her with genuine respect and admiration. Television reporters surrounded her, asking for interviews, while competition officials began planning how to document and verify the historic shot for inclusion in record books. Sarah remained humble and gracious as she answered questions about her incredible achievement. She credited her grandfather's patient teaching and years of dedicated practice for her success. She emphasized that skill and preparation mattered more than expensive equipment or military credentials. Her story would inspire shooters around the world and change how people viewed both women in competitive shooting and the importance of judging competitors by their abilities. Competition officials immediately began the process of documenting the 4,000-meter bullseye for official recognition as the longest confirmed precision shot in competitive shooting history. Multiple witnesses signed statements confirming what they had observed, while electronic sensors provided precise measurements of the bullet impact location. As the sun set over the Wyoming prairie, Sarah carefully cleaned and packed her bright pink rifle, preparing for the long drive back to her small Montana town. She had proven that an unlikely champion could emerge from anywhere and achieve the impossible through dedication and belief in herself. The woman they had laughed at was driving home as a legend. The bright pink rifle that had been dismissed as a toy was now famous around the world as the weapon that accomplished the impossible shot. Sarah Mitchell had forever changed competitive shooting and inspired countless people to pursue their dreams regardless of what others might think about their unconventional approach to achieving greatness. Sarah drove through the night across the empty highways of Wyoming and Montana with her bright pink rifle secured, safely in the backseat of her Honda Civic. The radio played quietly as she thought about the incredible events of the past 4 days. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from news stations and shooting magazines, but she had turned off the notifications hours ago, needing time to process what had happened. The dashboard clock showed 3 in the morning when she finally pulled into the gravel driveway of her small house on the outskirts of Millerville, Montana. The tiny town had a population of just 800 people, and Sarah had lived there her entire life except for college. Her house was a modest 2-bedroom home that she had inherited from her grandmother, along with the flower gardens that surrounded it. Sarah sat in her car for several minutes, looking at the familiar porch light that had welcomed her home countless times before. Everything looked exactly the same as when she had left 4 days earlier, but she felt completely different. The shy librarian who had driven away in nervous excitement had returned as a world record holder and shooting legend. She carefully carried her rifle case into the house and placed it in the gun safe her grandfather had installed years ago. The bright pink weapon that had shocked the shooting world now rested quietly among her other rifles, waiting for the next practice session. Sarah made herself a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table, trying to understand how much her life had changed in such a short time. Her phone showed over 200 missed calls and more than 500 texts, Messages from people around the world wanting to talk about her incredible shot. News websites had posted articles about her achievement with headlines calling her the most unlikely champion in shooting sports history. Social media was filled with photos of her bright pink rifle and videos of her perfect 4,000-meter shot. Sarah finally fell asleep on her couch, still wearing the yellow sundress she had worn to the competition. She woke up 6 hours later to the sound of car doors slamming in her driveway. Through her front window, she could see news trucks from television stations in 3 different states, setting up cameras and satellite equipment. On her front lawn, reporters knocked on her door asking for interviews, while photographers took pictures of her house and flower gardens. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention and decided to stay inside until the crowds disappeared. She had never been comfortable being the center of attention in the media circus outside. Her door felt surreal and frightening. Her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, called to warn her that more news trucks were arriving and that reporters were asking townspeople about Sarah's background and shooting history. The elderly woman offered to bring groceries so Sarah would not have to leave her house until the media attention calmed down. By noon, the crowd outside had grown to include reporters from national television networks and shooting sports magazines. A producer from a major talk show called, offering to fly Sarah to New York for a television appearance. A book publisher wanted to discuss writing her autobiography, while a movie studio expressed interest in buying the rights to her story. Sarah felt trapped in her own home by the overwhelming response to her achievement. She had expected some attention, but not the media frenzy that had descended on her quiet town. All she had wanted was to prove that she belonged in competitive shooting, and now the entire world seemed interested in her story. The phone rang constantly with offers for endorsement, deals from rifle manufacturers, scope companies, and ammunition makers. Several sponsors wanted to pay her substantial amounts of money to use their products in future competitions. A major sporting goods chain offered to create a line of pink rifles and accessories inspired by her success. Saratown Library, where she worked, called to say they had received dozens of interview requests from journalists wanting to know about their famous employee. The head librarian, Mrs. Johnson, was excited about the positive attention but worried about how the media circus would affect the quiet atmosphere that library patrons expected. 3 days after returning home, Sarah finally agreed to hold a press conference in the library meeting room to answer questions from the gathered reporters. She wore a simple blue dress and spoke quietly about her grandfather's influence on her shooting development and her years of practice. In rural Montana, the reporters seemed surprised by her modest demeanor and genuine humility about her historic achievement. They had expected someone more flashy and dramatic, but found instead a soft-spoken librarian who credited her success to hard work and family values. Her sincerity and down-to-earth personality made her even more appealing to the public following her story. Sarah explained that her bright pink rifle was painted that way because she liked cheerful colors and wanted to express her personality through her equipment. She had never intended to make a statement about women in shooting sports, but was pleased that her success might inspire other women to try competitive shooting. When asked about her future plans, Sarah said she intended to return to work at the library and continue practicing for future competitions. She had no interest in becoming a professional shooter or celebrity endorser. The small-town life she had always known was more important to her than fame or money. A week after the press conference, life in Millerville began returning to normal as media attention shifted to other stories. Sarah went back to work at the library, where patrons treated her the same as always despite her newfound fame. Children asked to see pictures of her pink rifle, while elderly residents shared stories about their own experiences with hunting and target shooting. Sarah established a youth shooting program at the local range using some of the prize money from her record-breaking shot. She wanted to teach young people the same lessons her grandfather had shared with her about patience, discipline, and respect for firearms. The program attracted children from surrounding towns who were eager to learn from the famous lady with the pink rifle. Months later, Sarah still received letters from young shooters around the world thanking her for showing that anyone could achieve great things through dedication and practice. Her story had inspired a new generation of competitors who painted their rifles in bright colors and approached shooting with joy rather than grim seriousness.